Hey, good evening. Welcome to A Foreigner in the Philippines. Wanted to look at what happened to the Philippines and why they are as they are, why there is this love of the American way. And it goes back quite a way, because once when World War II was happening and the vulnerability of the American forces was shown, then you had 3 years in the Philippines, you had 3 years of occupation by the Japanese. And the Japanese were, by all accounts, we're not that kind about things. They came in and they were shocked at the Americanization of the Philippine way of life. And they tried to instill a more Asian way. They tried to reinstate the Asian way of looking at things. Well, anyway, it was not, what it did was it showed that America's commitment was not quite as pure-hearted as they might have thought, and the Philippines, so it was a little bit like they loved the Americans more than the Americans loved them. In fact, Americans were quite derogatory about the Filipinos for quite a time. But anyway, I'm just using a reference book for some of the things. On their return in 1945, the Americans recognized the independence of the Philippines, but they didn't quite let go, and their not letting go meant that they took some perks. So they never fully let go. Americans were granted equal parity rights in the newly forged Philippine Constitution. The US military bases enjoyed a 99-year lease with the right to interfere in any situation which had national security. So when they returned as liberators, they were gratefully received by the population, who had been maltreated by the Japanese. So taking up where they left off, American administrators, they handpicked leaders to run the country. Well, MacArthur, the former brigadier general, on his staff was Manuel Rojas, who unfortunately had also served with the Japanese occupational forces. So there was this taint on him of being a collaborator. And but anyway, that was swept under the rug, and he was elected as president. So there was a lot of stuff was going on right then. The US had started giving a back pay, and what happened was that people who received this back pay were a little bit of a mix, and post-war years were marked by a mixing up of heroes and heels, patriots and collaborators. To complicate matters, a resistance movement, now this is interesting, a resistance movement was with communist ideology, had gained a foothold during the war, and the Americans worked to purge them. Of course, the communist thing wouldn't go down with Americans, would it? So that movement was pushed underground, and it persists today as an armed network evolving into the NPA, New People's Army, and that's still here. So anyway, there was then quite a mixed bag of events and experiences, and they finally started to come into mass media, and mass media was one area relatively open for public expression of grievances. So people were coming forward, the young, the old, the left, the right, and they actually started to get into quite a bit of a mess, because they were using the politics in the media, and it all began to be quite messy. And this is where old Ferdinand stepped up, and he announced, he went in and he took on the martial law, him and his wife took in a special order of 200 Jews, I believe. So anyway, well, that didn't work out so well, and it became a period of time when Marcos ruled. Well, I remember being here, actually, showing my age again, not that my face doesn't already do that, but I remember being here when Marcos was still in power, and some of the things that I heard about what happened then were not nice, bedtime stories. But anyway, what tended to happen was that Marcos's cronies and the people that he favoured were making a ton of money. They were doing very well, thanks. I remember when Marcos was finally thrown out, that I remember pickup trucks that were stopped in the streets by the liberating forces, such as they were, finding crates of dollars. You know, in one case there was a crate which had $1 million in it. I remember that being stopped in the street. And so Mr. Marcos actually fled the country after that. That was the advent of people power. And I remember reading this, of how he actually sent out the troops to kill their own people, and they were going down. Let me see, it was a thoroughfare called EDSA in Manila, and they sent these guys down. These are young soldiers who were actually hardly able to move in their tanks and stuff, and the women were mothers and were saying, I know your mother. They were able to say this, and sticking flowers in the end of the guns and stuff like that, acts of complete and incredible heroism. So in the end, Marcos fled with his family and went to live a life of hardship in Hawaii, I think it was. And now he's in the ground in the Heroes Cemetery. So what then came was Corazon Aquino. Now Aquino came in, and she was a much loved leader, but she assumed and she resumed pre-martial law institutions such as the Congress and the Senate. But to the disappointment of many of the idealists, she failed to turn the economy, because the economy had taken a terrible dump under Marcos. Even though some people said that Marcos had a lot going for him in some ways, I don't think he allowed the big banks to come in and take control, which they do in practically every country. That's another thing, isn't it? So now we're actually seeing that, and we're seeing what could be termed the turnaround of the economy. But in actual fact, because of the mess that actually started to happen, Filipinos started to flee the country, and at one time, at the time of this book and the research that they did for this book, it was only 1 million Filipinos who were OFWs, overseas Filipino workers, and the money that they were sending back was actually paying for everything. Now it's probably, and I'm only guessing now, but I think it's in the billions. I know that it's many millions of OFWs that are out there sending money home, and that money is a vital bloodline into the Philippine economy. So anyway, then the one thing that President Corazon Aquino did was she she endorsed the presidential candidacy of her defense minister, General Fidel Ramos. Now, Ramos was one of the chief architects of the Marcos martial law regime. It's a funny thing how things come around, don't they? But anyway, Fidel Ramos was sworn into office after winning the 1992 elections. 1992, that was when I went to America. Having inherited Aquino's appalling neglect of the nation's energy needs, resulting in monumental power shortages, I remember this, that paralyzed the nation with daily 8-hour brownouts for almost 2 years. The new president worked towards reversing the economic slide, and I'm sure that he more than did his best. But it's not my intention to comment in. I'm commenting here historically rather than politically. But anyway, business remains somewhat stagnant as pre-martial law style politics has thrown the traffic of national programs in a political gridlock. I think it's improved since then. I see lots of work going on in my surroundings and my everyday thing. When anybody ever wants to know, is it safe in the Philippines? When I look around me and I see how people respond to me. At one time, when there was a backlash against the American presence here, people said, is it safe for Americans? Remember when that was going on? And the President Duterte had expressed a dislike of Americans at one point. He actually spoke back to President Obama, which I always thought, well, good for him. He is the president after all. So he expressed his displeasure there, and of course that rocked back the Americans quite a bit. But anyway, after that, Ramos went on and he did what he could. Now I take my glasses off, I can't read the damn book anyway. So it's been a mixed bag, and what actually happens now is that if people ask me questions like about are Americans safe, I'm not American, although I am an American citizen. When I say I'm not American, I mean by birth I'm British, and I see that there is whatever Americans are going away thinking about the Philippines, that they're turning their back on them. There's something ingrained in the Filipino mind that makes Americans, it puts Americans on a love-hate relationship. They either love to hate them or they hate to love them, and it's part of the Filipino psyche. They can't not revere America. It's just, I just don't believe it's possible. And before America was shown the door, when Corazon Aquino was here, and she decided that that was going to happen, I spoke to, when Beth and I went up to Manila, we went up to Angeles, which is on the other side, a couple of hours away from Manila. That had the Clark base there, and I saw the base, which is surrounding the airport, and it's been allowed to deteriorate now, and doesn't look so good. Possibly that may change, but back then I spoke to different businessmen who said, one in particular said he had a great living when the Americans were here, that the Americans got business going, and contrary to what I'd always thought, that both America and Britain tended to go into countries and take rather than give. My Filipino contact there, who was a businessman well, he was a businessman when I was talking to him, and he had been a businessman in the stay of the Americans when they had a firm grip. And he said that he made a very, very good living, that he would love to have the Americans back. So there we are. The Filipino way of thinking embraces the American way, and that is, I think, beyond doubt. So, following, just to get back and quickly go over the idea of the Japanese being here. Japanese are pretty tough, I think, pretty tough, especially during war. They didn't brook any resistance, not even from their own troops. And you may remember some of the ideas that emerged when they were still cleaning up islands in the South China Sea, because they had soldiers of the Japanese army who were holed out on these tiny islands, and they were hiding in caves, and they had no arms, but they were loyal to the emperor, and the emperor, as you may know, was a god, and I think is still pretty highly revered. But they had to go and plead with these guys to give themselves up. In fact, no, you're not giving yourself up, you're just going free. But they didn't believe that Japan had fallen, and they thought that it was... I got a bit of a shock there now. A cat has suddenly leapt up. So they actually didn't think that Japan had failed the war, and they had no way of really knowing otherwise, so they remained true to the emperor. So back to the present, and that is the way that things are going with the Americans. And let's face it, the Chinese are something of a problem. They're going around building islands as if 7,000 islands wasn't enough. So it will be an interesting few years ahead. Thanks for looking in. I hope that looking at some of the cultural background of how we arrived here in the Philippines, as thinking Filipino when I say that, this is what happened. You've got the Spanish. The Spanish came. I think that even the British have had something of a go, or was that Vietnam? A lot of people have come in and tried, and all over the world, some of the major forces like the Brits and the French, Portuguese were great sailors, and because they were great sailors, they also had a great effect on the development of the world. Brazil, the national language in Brazil is Portuguese. So, too much to talk about, isn't it? Thanks for looking in. Don't forget to like. I understand, regretfully, I understand that we are not back in control of our comments. It's a very confusing situation, because it seems like they've allowed the comments, and then 10 or 15 people get to comment and say, hey, wow, great, we got the comments back, and then they get deleted or taken down. Well, actually they do get deleted because we never see them. So a quick note, if you've actually asked a question in one of what you think is now a reinstated comment, and I'm not answering you, it's not because I'm shunning you or snubbing you. I haven't seen your comment. So you need to go back onto Messenger and give me a message and ask you a question again. So thanks very much for being with us. Bye for now.